Hello, everyone. I'm Summer Burton, and I am here today on behalf of Literacy Link South Central, which is the regional literacy network that supports the Elgin, Middlesex, Oxford, Brant, Haldimand, and Norfolk regions. Although obviously we like to cast a wide net and invite all sorts of people to the PD that we do. I am very excited that you're joining us today, and boy, a lot of you have joined us today. So we actually have about 80 attendees that are going to be on today's webinar. The majority of you work in literacy and basic skills, but I'm also really thrilled that we are welcoming representatives from community services and social services, public libraries, and employment agencies as well. So we've gotten several requests from folks who couldn't join us today to view the webinar later. So please know that we are recording today's session. If for any reason you don't feel comfortable attending the session while it's being recorded, you're more than welcome to log off and then view the recording when it's posted to our website later this week. So why Zoom? This isn't really a sales pitch for the platform. We don't work for Zoom or anything. We pay like everyone else for our subscription. But that said, since the start of the pandemic, Zoom has exploded in popularity. There was about 10 million meeting participants a day as of December 2019, and there are over 300 million a day, only 5 months later, which is remarkable. And that was an April statistic, so I know that in fact, even beyond that, it's continuing to grow. Clearly, a lot of the people that we work with and serve are using Zoom, and so we just want to help make that process a little bit easier. Now, inherently, Zoom is actually fairly easy to use in the first place. It's been one of the platforms that many people, even those without stronger literacy skills in the digital world, have been able to figure out. It's also popular, I think, because it's low in cost. You technically don't even need a paid account to use it, which makes it an excellent fit for those of us who work in the nonprofit field. From a security perspective, while there were concerns, particularly in the summer and fall of 2020, Zoom has been pushing frequent updates to ensure that it's safe and secure, as long as you use appropriate safeguards to protect your meeting. So that's things like enabling passwords and waiting rooms. When you dig into Zoom settings, you'll see even more security features that are optional. Things like end-to-end encryption and requiring people that people should have a authenticated Zoom account before they can dial in by phone. So I have posted a link on your screen for some more information about Zoom's security features, and I know that that was a question that was raised by one of our attendees today. Now, this is actually the third in a series of 3 presentations that we've shared. The first was on the Zoom user experience, where we looked at updating your Zoom profile, changing your personal video and audio settings, things like setting that virtual background, and how to interact with tools like chat, polls, the whiteboard, breakout rooms, not as a host, but as a participant. The second was on the Zoom host experience. And as I imagine you've already figured out, having used Zoom before, there's a lot to look at. We broke it into 2 sections. The first was about the Zoom settings and how a host can change them to suit their needs. The second was about putting those settings into action during a meeting itself, from how to schedule and launch a session and manage attendee participation, to the ins and outs of managing tools like chats and polls, the whiteboard, and the all popular breakout rooms as a host. So if either of those settings sounds like what you came here today looking for, I do hope that you'll view the recordings. Session 2 has already been posted on our website, which is www.llsc.on.ca. And we are actually going to be re-recording session 1 because we had a little glitch with our recording. So it will be re-recorded and posted to the same website shortly. So today's session, it's the last in the series and looks at the specific functions of Zoom, looks less at the specific functions of Zoom, but more about how to effectively and professionally plan and run a really good interactive Zoom session for your attendees. And that leads us to today's agenda. So we're going to be starting by looking at platforms that you could use to develop a Zoom presentation. While we won't be getting really deeply into the differences between one kind of platform and another, we will talk about what is common in all and how to structure a presentation that should be easy for your attendees to follow along with. We'll also be talking about something I'm calling putting your best foot forward. And really what I mean by that is setting yourself up for success when you're going to be sitting down in front of your webcam and trying to do a presentation that sounds professional and looks professional. We'll then follow up with talking about how to engage people during your session, and not just during, but also before and after a presentation, because there's a lot more that we can do with a session than just talk to people in the middle of it. So I am going to take just a second here because I can see our chat lit up a little bit, and I'm going to ask Anne-Marie if there's anything that I should know or discuss from our chat.
Nothing yet, Summer. We just posted the slides for everybody to have, so people were thanking us for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so one of the first things that we're going to look at today is developing an actual presentation, the visual thing you show people when you're in the middle of a Zoom, like this one. So what you're seeing on your screen, that's my slide deck for today. The most commonly used platform is Microsoft PowerPoint, and it's what I am currently using. As you guys know, I sent a short survey out to you in advance, and through it, quite a number of you told me that you already have experience with PowerPoint, which is great. There are other platforms that we can use. A couple of examples I've used before, Google Slides and Prezi. If you've used other presentation software that you think attendees at today's session should know about, can you please tell us about them in the chat? I will be checking in with Anne-Marie to hear your suggestions in a moment. Regardless of what platform you use, the theory behind an in-person presentation and an online one is pretty much the same. We want to get a message across to our audience that is clear, that is interesting to look at, and is informative. So for the most part, effective presentations are built something like this. They start with a title slide, so attendees know that they're in the right place ahead of time. There's usually another slide to introduce the presentation and answer the questions, why are we here? What are we going to learn or discuss? Maybe even how long will this take? What follows is however many slides it takes to share the information you're discussing. You know, obviously, the more thorough and in-depth your presentation, the longer and more slides you may have. At the end, there's usually a summary or a conclusion slide with next steps for the audience to take, and possibly a Q&A if you're presenting to a live audience and you have the time to do so. So I'll pause for just a second before I move to the next slide and ask Anne-Marie if there were any suggestions for additional presentation software people have used.
Well, a couple of people said that Canva have really nice slides, and capital A, capital H, capital A slides. And somebody provided the link to that. So thank you for that, and thank you for the link to Canva.
Awesome. That's fabulous. Thank you. All right. So once we get a sense of the layout for our presentation, it's time to start thinking about what we're actually going to say. If you truly, deeply know the content that you're discussing, you could choose to wing it and talk off of the top of your head. I tend to say that for most people, though, either having an outline of key points or even a full script to refer to tends to be a much better idea. Now, for me, drafting a script, like the flow of the presentation, is actually one of the first steps I take before developing any slides at all. It's kind of hard to get a sense of how many slides you're going to need in your content section if you don't know what you're going to say before you get there. It tends to take a bit longer. So that's a little tip that I would suggest. Developing an outline or a script in advance also gives us the foundation for what should actually go on our slides, because we may think it's a simple concept that we want to explain, but by the time you write out the instructions for what it is that you want to say, you may realize it's probably going to take 4 or 5 slides in order for you to make it understandable and legible for your audience. So a big no-no is putting everything we're going to say on the slide. We've all been there at presentations where someone just reads everything on the slide to you. It is mind-numbingly boring and probably the reason for the phrase another meeting that could have been an email. It's nothing that we want to do. So we want to do something a little different. We want to summarize things that are going to go on our slide. So the things that we could put on, maybe bullet points with keywords and concepts. Graphics are a great choice, especially if they represent what we're talking about. Give your attendees some food for thought. You know, that old saying about a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is a great example of that. So speaking of which, when we're developing presentations, the way it looks is really important to consider. Presentation software like PowerPoint, Google Slides, I have used Canva before. I'm glad that somebody brought that up because they're beautiful, beautiful templates. You can choose from them with preloaded headers and text and colors and layouts, but you can also choose to start with a blank presentation where just everything is generic and then manually change the font size and color, the background color, the graphics, and a whole lot more. So something to keep in mind when you're formatting the look of the presentation is that lightly colored text on a lightly colored background can be really difficult to read. Contrast helps with readability. So colors like black or navy blue on a white or cream background work really well. Unfortunately, too much contrast, you're back to having a problem again. So I would avoid red writing on a green background, blue writing on an orange background, and so on. I also suggest that we leave some white space, some room for imagination. It's not a bad thing. And if we fill every available space with words, our attendees probably will not invest the time in actually reading it. A screen just chock full of text is pretty overwhelming to look at. When we're choosing colors, aside from the font tips that I gave you earlier, we can also look for the presentation itself as inspiration. As an example, if we were presenting about our own organization, we could look at the color and style of the company logo and use it to inspire choices for borders, fonts, or images. If the topic is meant to be exciting, maybe we want to choose bold colors. If it's meant to be soothing and relaxing, calmer, more peaceful colors. If, like me, you're presenting on how to use a certain program or tool, look to it for inspiration. It is no coincidence that the border of this presentation is the same color as the Zoom icon. We don't want to underestimate the importance of the colors in graphics we embed in our presentation either. They should also reflect the look and the feel of our inspiration colors. I want to give you a couple of examples that I created based on some of the organizations that are joining us in our webinar today. Just before I do, I'll remind everybody that we should probably have ourselves muted because I can hear some talking in the background. So if you're not currently muted, if you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Okay, some examples. So first, I wanted to give a shout out to our friends from CNIB Deafblind Community Services, Carrefour Communautaire Francophone de London, and Hutton House. I hope you don't mind, but I borrowed your logos for some examples today. So we'll start with Hutton House. Very simple background, mostly white. However, what I added was a swirl to the one side of this screen that has a color very reflective of the color in their logo. I also copied for the title, It's a People Place, of this theoretical presentation. I copied the font style that they've used in the Hutton House logo and reflected the exact color that they used for their logo as the subtitle. So that's an example of how I took inspiration from one of the attendees here today. And for our friends from Deafblind Community Services, instead of doing a white background, I'm a personal fan of a white background, but I went with a green background because that is their signature color, and have maintained a black, white, and green color scheme throughout that looks a lot like the colors that they use in some of the graphics on their own website, including the hand logo that you see in the bottom corner. And finally, for our friends at Carrefour or CCFL, they have one of the most delightfully colored logos that I've seen in a long time, with just about every color in the rainbow in there, which makes me happy. So I decided to play around with that and reflect it in the look of the graphic. Instead of doing just a Solid white, I've added a footer to the page, and this would be something that I would use on every page. I'd do a master slide so that this bar, the blue swirl across the bottom, would show up on every single page of the presentation. Another little trick is looking at the actual logo for CCFL. If you can squint and take a quick peek down at CCFL, you'll see it's a lighter green at the top, but a darker green at the bottom of those letters. So I've reflected that in the title of the presentation as well. So that's some inspiration, things that you can potentially do. One more tip for presentations. Once you have your reference notes or script done and you've developed your slides using some of the suggestions that I just shared, I would recommend you export a copy to PDF. That will allow you to share your presentation with attendees, either via email or through the Zoom chat like Anne-Marie did, but without the issues that can arise with opening different file extensions. So not everyone has PowerPoint, perhaps they won't be able to open it. Another reason why I prefer to send a PDF personally is that a PDF is not easily editable, whereas if you send a raw PowerPoint file, somebody could then just rewrite some of the information in there and make it look like you said something you didn't. So not a bad idea to protect yourself by sending PDFs instead. I'll pause for just a moment. Anne-Marie, are there any questions I should be aware of?
There's only one from Paulette. She loves the slide and she wants to know if she can have it.
Yes, Paulette, oui, madame, I will send it to you. In case you had not guessed, Paulette is from CCFL. Merci. Okay, so there is a lot more to prepare than just our presentation slides and Zoom settings. No, you know what? Actually, I'm going to talk about Zoom settings first. I apologize, I skipped forward there. So some things to consider. I did say earlier that we were not going to look at the specific Zoom settings because we did go through every one of these in our second session. But something I want to point out that's really important to keep in mind is that if you check your settings in zoom.us before you schedule your presentation, you will find that what you've chosen in zoom.us will be available when you schedule and launch your presentation. Zoom is a very dynamic platform, which means that it will only give you the options in a Zoom meeting that you have chosen to enable before you started the Zoom meeting. If you did not enable breakout rooms, you will not be able to use them in your meeting. There can be confusion over this because, especially if, like in our office, you have an account that multiple people share, I may go in and say, I definitely want breakout rooms scheduled for this meeting. And then the next person who uses this account may go in and say, I definitely don't, and turn them off. So a quick scan of your settings before you actually begin scheduling your presentation, and again, before you launch your presentation, is really smart. The things that I'd suggest you be looking for are if your waiting room and passcode are enabled, if your attendee audio and video settings are the way you want them to be. You have a lot of play in these settings. You can make it so that the videos don't show up, that everyone's screen is turned off, everyone's mic is turned off. Now, people can change those settings once they're in the meeting, but you may prefer to start, for example, with everyone muted. So take a look at those. You may not want people to be able to use virtual backgrounds. You can make it so that they can't load them in the settings before you schedule your meeting. You also want to think about who can share their screen, who can annotate, that's writing on the screen. And the big thing is once you've done that in Zoom US and you've scheduled your meeting, you can edit the meeting to create your breakout rooms and load your polls in advance. It's not necessary. You can technically do it once the meeting has launched, but being able to get that out of the way ahead of time means you can concentrate on your actual presentation during your presentation instead of being like, hang on a second, I'm just going to have to do some typing here while your audience stares at you, which isn't really what you want. So for more information about all of these different settings, again, please do take a look at the second webinar in our series. Putting your best foot forward. We want to look at a couple of simple things we can do to make sure that when we start our presentation, we not only sound good, but come across as the trusted professionals that we are. So the first thing I think about is, where are we hosting from? For most of us, that is in our living room or bedroom or kitchen counter. So my recommendation is that we turn our webcams on well in advance of the session and really look around at what we see. Is your laundry on display back there? Is the wall behind you in the middle of being repainted? Can we see anything in the background that does not match the story we're trying to tell our audience? You don't want to be running a webinar or a Zoom meeting about decluttering and have a giant mess behind you, as an example. So speaking of examples, here's one for you. Two backgrounds. One obviously is in my house. And as you can probably tell, I have a lot of stuff on my walls. And at the time I had my Christmas tree up. So while it's cute and I like it, and I've certainly had lots of meetings there, I would prefer not to run a presentation, a professional presentation, with that as my background. I could try to put up a virtual background, but for any of you who've ever tried it, and this goes back to speaking to that first Zoom webinar that we were discussing, the user experience. If you have ever tried to use a virtual background when you have photos on your wall, the way I have photos on my wall, you will discover it does not work. It creates a blurry, choppy, pixelated mess behind you, which is just as distracting as anything else. So I've got the other example, which I suppose I didn't really need, did I? Because you can get the same sense behind me. We can stage our area before a Zoom presentation, and I usually do, to be honest. The virtual background is great if you have a solid wall behind you, or a backdrop like a sheet even. If we don't, clean up whatever's in range of the webcam, place some items of meaning or relevance in the frame. So the photo that I chose to pop in here was taken when I was doing a webinar on play as a tool for learning. And you can see I've got these big dice behind me, and there's a couple of games in there. If I widened it a little bit more, which I suppose I could have turned my camera, you might have seen there were other board games sitting on the shelf back there. You can do some staging. And again, it's just a way to kind of reinforce your topic if you have the ability to do that. Another important element of the space we're presenting from is the lighting. It can have a huge impact about how you look, how you come across on the screen. That may mean that you need to move your lighting around. You might need to put a lamp on your desk, close or open a curtain, add some extra lighting somewhere, and it's not something you want to do in the last 5 minutes before you present. Let's take a look at a couple of ways lighting can make a difference. So again, these are both in the office, and one is what happens when you sit directly in front of a bright light, or in this case, in front of a window. So one of the first things you want to look for is getting out from in front of a window, because the background washes you out horribly. The crispness and clarity is lost. And in fact, especially if you're like me and you have lighter colored hair, it can actually fade your face so that you can't even see where you end and the background begins. So something to keep in mind. And the opposite problem is also true. If you're in too dark a space, especially if, like me, you wear glasses, you're going to find the glare, the reflection from the monitor that you're using to run your presentation actually whites out your eyes, so you can't be seen properly either. All of these things are just distracting. So if we've gotten past the background, one of the things I would also recommend to people is hosting with a riser under your laptop, putting it on a stack of books if you need to. Not only does nobody really need to see our ceiling tiles or look up our nose, but the light balance also changes, and it often will auto-correct when your camera is raised, which means that some of your lighting issues just go away automatically. That light you can see above my head in the too tilted angle, it washes absolutely everything out. But as you can see today, tilting the camera back down, the laptop screen, I guess, back down, it gets rid of that glaring light. A little bit of it on the top of my head, but it's at least it's not washing everything else out. We have also, speaking of things that you want to do to present yourself. Seen a lot of jokes that no one is wearing pants to meetings now that they're not in person. And it is possible that PJ bottoms and a sweatshirt have become our common work from home uniforms. But much like our background, what we wear tells a story about who we are. So we probably want to make sure it's appropriate for the message we're trying to send. Some clothes can also be really distracting. In particular, bold patterns and wildly contrasting colors can blur on camera. And if you are going to use a virtual background, you want to make absolutely sure that you are not wearing anything the same color as your background, or parts of you will end up looking invisible. Again, that's distracting. Not very long ago, when I first started messing around with the idea of virtual backgrounds, had a white background and a virtual background that was this beautiful bright blue color. The problem being that every time I smiled, my teeth were neon blue. And if I opened my eyes wide in surprise, oh, they were neon blue too. So play around with all of that stuff in advance so you can find out the implications of what you have done before you're in the middle of the session. So everything in camera range, including us, is now looking the way we want. And we need to think about how we sound. And this is where your headset and mic comes in. I do strongly recommend using a headset when you present. A lot of people have either built-in or external speakers and microphones, and they will work, but the problem, well, it's a few things. First, our mouths are not very close to those microphones that are built into your device. So that can lead to voice distortion. It can lead to staticky sounds, lack of clarity, basically, for anyone trying to listen to you. Second, because they're built to pick up sounds from several directions, they will. You can pick up traffic outside, other people in your house, pets, your toilet flushing. The list of things you don't really need people to hear goes on for a while. So if you're using speakers, that problem actually grows even more, because your mic can pick up every sound your participants make and then feed it back to them in this echoey sort of psychedelic audio loop. Sometimes with the added bonus of some screeching feedback. Not nice. So a headset is a must, and there are two different kinds that people use. First, the ones that come with your smartphone, most of the time. The earbuds with the microphone on the cord. And they are okay. They are certainly better than using speakers and hoping that your device's built-in mic picks up your voice clearly. One issue for you to watch for is friction on the microphone. If you have long hair or are wearing loose clothes or a scarf, or tend to talk with your hands, as you may have noticed that I do, you can cause a lot of extra noise that ends up drowning out your voice. Those mics are technically built to pick up your voice coming from 6 to 8 inches away, which means that a noise generated right up against the mic itself is a really, really loud one. It will absolutely drown you out. Ideally then, we would use a headset like this one. So on mine, the mic is positioned quite close to my mouth. It's away from my hair, away from my clothes, anything I might do with my hands or arms, and it's not able to pick up the sounds of the audience today, which are coming through my headset. So our visuals and sound are arranged. That leaves one thing, and that's our relationship with the camera. That may sound strange, but it's one thing that's been so deeply lost by the need to run meetings online, that lack of face-to-face communication, body language, eye contact, that sense of connection to others that you're sharing this experience with. We may not be able to see every one of our attendees at the same time. I mean, especially in large groups like this today, they can see you. If we spend all of our presentation looking somewhere other than towards the camera, it's incredibly discombobulating. But if you appear to be looking at attendees, they become more engaged in the presentation. Now, I get that it can be hard when, as I suggested earlier, you're using a script or bullet point notes of what you want to cover. But it's an important way to help attendees feel like they're fully engaged. So my suggestion is to post your speaking notes somewhere near your camera so that if you need to reference them, you're accomplishing both things at once. I'm going to pause here for just a second and check in with Anne-Marie to see if there's anything I should be addressing in our chat.
Well, a few people were commenting on how much they liked some of the tips. I like the one about wearing pants. I think that's a good reminder. Um, Anne-Marie was saying, I use a Bluetooth headset, and Celine was saying, buy a good headset to avoid ear damage in the future.
Ooh, that's a nice one too. I have to say, I have a pretty good headset, but even with a good headset, by the end of a longer call, like, you know, that feeling when you take it off and you feel the blood rush back to your ears. It's like, oh, I'm so glad that was done and I can breathe again. So I think that is a fabulous tip. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so my last tip for putting your best foot forward is to make sure that your feet aren't alone. As we have already discussed, Zoom offers a lot of great features that you might want to use in your presentation, like polls, chat, the whiteboard, and having lots of tools is great, but managing them takes a lot of work. So I cannot overstress the importance of having a teammate to support you in these circumstances, especially if you have large groups or you're going to use a lot of the built-in Zoom bells and whistles. So tag team is a fabulous option. One person can be responsible for facilitating the meeting or workshop, while another person handles the tech. They get the very busy job of watching and responding to chat messages, helping solve problems that attendees may be having, maybe launching polls, controlling other people's microphones, monitoring breakout rooms. You get the point, right? There's a lot. And as you can tell from my constant references to my amazing coworker, Anne-Marie, it's a practice I certainly rely on a lot. So it's a critical one in my world. So one way that you can head off some of that work that I just described to you in advance is to make it possible for attendees to reach out before the session with some questions. We can do something simple, like include our contact information when we advertise the session, or we can take it one step further by requiring registration in advance. With a casual drop-in session or weekly team meeting, it's really not necessary, but with larger workshops, pre-registration is a great idea. Not only does it give us a sense of how big our audience will be, but we get access to the email addresses they used to register. With that, instead of waiting for them to come to us, we can reach out to attendees in advance. We can introduce ourselves, give them a way to contact us. And if we include a survey, much like the one that I sent you, we can do some data gathering before the session even starts. Here are a couple of good survey questions that I sometimes like to use. What made them interested in the session? What is it they hope to learn or get from it? The answer to this type of question can help us understand what motivates our attendees so we can speak to it directly during the session. We can quote them directly. You told me that you wanted to be able to X, and what we're going to talk about today should help you reach that goal. Showing attendees that we've heard what they said and paid attention will make them feel like a valued part of the session rather than a passive recipient of information. There will be times then when what people ask for or say they would like to get out of the session does not match what you can offer. But it does give you the opportunity to head off that at the pass and let people know in advance exactly what you will be offering and perhaps even where they can go to get what they were thinking they were going to get out of your presentation today. Another thing to ask, what do they already know or have experience with? Have they used a similar service before or already taken training in a related field? This provides us information we can use to honor past experience and understanding that our attendees already have, and also help us craft sessions that don't just tell people what they already know. We can use this information during remote workshops in particular to draw on the expertise of individual attendees, asking them directly to share valuable information or opinions that we already know that they have. Okay, in just a moment, a poll is going to pop up on your screen. It is going to give you an opportunity to let us know if you've ever done a getting to know you survey like this. So give me just a second. Okay, because we had somebody else logged in as us, I'm going to ask all my wonderful LLSC friends if you can do a really quick check of clicking the word polls and seeing if you're able to launch, because for whatever reason, it's saying, oh, you're logged in on another device. You can't launch.
Launched it, Summer.
Wonderful. I think there's going to be a button you see on that pop-up window, Anne-Marie, that says launch poll. So it should have popped up, but you still have to hit the launch button. You'll have to hit it about 4 times throughout the length of the survey.
Actually, people are already responding. We've got about 36 responses,
Perfect.
39 now, so.
Lovely. I just don't see it. So thank you. Can I have you walk us through it? That's right. Can I have you walk us through it then, since I can't see it at the moment? Thank you.
There's still some people answering, but
Perfect.
it looks like it's slowed down now. So have you ever sent out a get to know you survey before a workshop or meeting? 73% or 38 people said no, and 26% or 14 people said yes.
Awesome. Very, very cool. So at any point that you're ready, you can go ahead and close that poll, Anne-Marie. If I could ask for some input from those folks who say they have sent out a get to know you survey in advance before, I would appreciate it if you could use the chat to suggest some other questions that you've asked that you found really effective, that became, valuable sources of information for you as the host. Then we'll share those with everybody in a little bit. Thanks in advance. So connecting with attendees before the session is also helpful because, depending on our audience, our participants may not have strong digital literacy skills, or they may have never used Zoom before. If that's the case, they will probably be prompted to download and install the app or install a plugin for their internet browser. That step not only takes a little bit of time, but can be intimidating for some people. There's also that ongoing battle with speakers and microphones and headsets and webcams, and does everything work? And not everyone's even comfortable with the physically connecting, testing, and using those elements for participating in a Zoom meeting. And even if they are, it can take some time. So there are several things that we can do to help mitigate this particular challenge. First, during that get to know you survey, we can find out if our participants have ever used Zoom before or not. So we can let the newbies know exactly what to expect when they click the Zoom link we provided. If we suspect that they need to download or install anything, we can find a how-to video or clearly worded instruction pamphlet and offer it to them in advance so that they can follow along with it. We can also let them know what tech they'll need and provide them with some instructions on how to physically connect that technology to their computer and test that it's working if they've never done that before. We can also build in time for new Zoom users to go through this process by encouraging them to begin setting up for the meeting 15 or even 30 minutes in advance if they're brand new. Let them know that the process takes time, that it's completely normal, not to feel stupid, and that starting early is what will make it possible for them to fully participate when the actual Zoom session starts. And finally, I assume that there are going to be problems. This is where that staff tag team comes into play. If you can, provide participants a way to contact staff, either through chat if they've already made it online, or by phone if they haven't, for advice on things like installing and testing their mic, headset, speakers, webcam, etc. In addition to using the information that we learned from the client questionnaire, there are several things we can do during a Zoom session to engage attendees. First, we want to let them know when and how to provide input, to ask questions and give feedback, and that we really want them to do that. Most of us respond better to a conversation than a lecture, and while we'll be making decisions about how to engage our clients well in advance, it doesn't mean they'll anticipate what they should or shouldn't do. So we want to let them know. And because we want them to be engaged, we can create opportunities for them to answer questions. Verbally is a good one. An interactive Q&A is fairly simple in one-on-one or very small group sessions where questions can be easily managed by either leaving everyone's microphone on or asking participants to click a button indicating they want to speak. Then you can enable their microphone so they can answer. With larger groups where not everyone may have a mic or managing mics could be impractical, there are some other options. We can ask questions and generate answers through a chat feature like we have done today, for example. Using chat can engage those without a microphone more easily, but it can also be very challenging to manage unless you have a coworker or peer to support you. Having participants use a reaction button is another way that we can find out if they agree with a statement or have experience with something similar to what we're discussing. We can watch what sort of reactions pop up and then summarize what we see. To increase engagement, we can pick one of the people who used the reaction button and ask them point blank to share why they responded the way that they did. Hopefully not too confrontationally. We can also launch a poll that pops up on the participant screen during the session. Attendees can click to respond, you've just done this, and also see the percentage of people who chose each of the possible responses at the end. Something that provides them an opportunity to learn more about the thoughts and perspectives of their fellow attendees as well. It is worth noting that much like the poll I popped up, or thank goodness Anne-Marie popped up for me, they are multiple choice, so they're easy for participants to answer, but they don't really lend themselves to open-ended questions. Another fun multiple choice tool to engage people is online quizzes through the platform called Kahoot. They can be used to create interactive multiple choice quizzes that can be answered online or through the Kahoot app, allowing participants to register using a nickname to provide anonymity, and they get to compete for a high score in their answers, which is fun and often encourages people to try harder. We can also offer opportunities to brainstorm just as we would in an in-person session by using those Zoom breakout rooms. They're not only great for small group discussions, but for attendees to share their knowledge with the larger group as an expert. And speaking of client input, a thank you, great idea, can really go a long way. We can also reference people's input later in the session. As new topics arise that connect to comments made by participants earlier, we can talk about it, saying, oh yeah, that's almost exactly what Natalie was sharing about this topic earlier. Not only shows that we listened and remembered what they said, but brings their attention back to the meeting or workshop if they've wandered away. So we can also go beyond verbally acknowledging participant input by demonstrating that we're listening using a platform's built-in whiteboard, or sharing our screen, letting them see that we're listening by actually typing what they're saying on the screen as they talk. It's a really great way to engage visual learners as well, because it reinforces the concepts that they've heard being discussed out loud. So you can see what that looks like. Just a very quick check-in. Take a quick look down here. We should have our reaction buttons enabled down at the bottom. And if you could just do a quick reaction button, Anne-Marie, I'm hoping you can take a quick peek at this and see, have you used the whiteboard before? How many people have used the whiteboard, either as a host or a participant? Are we able to see the reactions, Anne-Marie, at all?
I see a couple of thumbs up. I'm
Awesome.
not sure if everybody knows where they are. So here they come.
There we go.
So on the far right hand side at the bottom there.
Faut que tu fasses ça. Ah ben, elle le demandait. Je savais pas si tu suivais.
All right. So we have found several, yes? Okay, as a reminder, we do have a complete walkthrough of how to actually launch and use the whiteboard with attendees in that second session. So if you are new to the whiteboard, I encourage you to take a look. Even if you don't want to view the whole session, take a look at that particular section. You'll learn a lot about how to actually get the whiteboard started and ready to go. One other thing that I wanted to mention actually just before we get into sort of building relationships after the session is the idea of providing clients with choices, especially in longer sessions. So when we give our folks that we're working with an opportunity to try things different ways, they have choice in how we're getting them to do something, it makes a really big difference in their engagement level. So as an example, you could challenge clients or participants to use the internet to find an example of something that's related to the topic that you're discussing, something that they think reinforces what you've been sharing. Could be a meme or a YouTube clip, a photo, a GIF, a blog post. The platform part isn't important. The opportunity to check for understanding and reinforce what it is that you've been discussing in a self-directed way is. And sharing their found item and explaining its significance to the topic also provides extra opportunities for client engagement, which is really, really helpful. So I'm going to pause for just a second and check in with Anne-Marie again regarding our chat. Is there anything before I move into follow-up after the workshops?
Well, there was a few things about, you had asked people what kinds of questions they asked prior to the presentations, and someone did actually reinforce that they asked their tutors if anyone needed training on how to use Zoom before the workshop or presentation, and you included that in a few slides later. And Tanya said she asked them to identify their knowledge prior to the Zoom session on a scale of 1 to 5. At the end of the session, asked everyone to identify if they are still in the same location on that scale. So it sounds like she uses the survey prior to the presentation to get started on her evaluation pieces.
Very nice. Yeah, so it's like doing a pre and a post, right? A traditional pre and post assessment. I'll shy away from the word assessment, but an understanding check, we'll call it that. That's awesome. All right, well, thank you very much for filling me in, Anne-Marie, I appreciate it. So keeping in mind that when your Zoom meeting or workshop is done, it doesn't actually have to be done. There are several steps that we can take to find out if our meeting was effective and continually engage our attendees. So first, we can do a follow-up survey, much like we did our Get to Know You survey. Sometimes this is a requirement by a funder or part of an evaluation, but even if it isn't, it can be really good practice. We can confirm attendees got something out of the meeting. In a perfect world, it would be what they came for in the first place, but that may not be the case. They may have learned more about their current situation or rules and regulations in place that they're going to need to work within. Maybe how to apply for a particular service or program, or what types of supports are available. If we ask them to describe what they got from the session, we'll also learn quickly whether the information we were trying to share was understood, like if we're all on the same page. Asking attendees what they plan to do with what they learned is another great way to confirm understanding, and also reinforce that information is good, but acting on it is better. And speaking of acting on things, if there were questions that came up during the session that we could not answer in the moment, and that's fine, following up with attendees and providing answers later is really, truly critical. A more subtle way of building that relationship is available if our Zoom session was a workshop. We can provide a certificate of completion, and if the session was one in a series, include a way for attendees to visualize how far through the series they are now. Successfully completing one online training session from a series of 6 and having something to show for it can often motivate attendees to try another one. Finally, depending on the service offered, we can also invite previous attendees to attend a later session to talk about how they learned how they used what they learned and act as a peer mentor to guide others. This reinforces the value of what they've learned and provides a role model for future attendees. It also demonstrates the authenticity of the information that you're sharing, that there is a real practical application for why somebody sat through and listened to what you were trying to teach them. So, where do we go from here? My best advice is to try some of what we talked about. So start with developing a short presentation. It doesn't have to be for work. It could be a slideshow of your last family vacation. Use something in the topic you're going to choose to create this short presentation to inspire your color choices, and make color choices. Don't just let it be random. Make some conscious decisions about what kind of colors and font sizes and photos you might want to use, and think about why. Next, turn on your webcam and really just take a few minutes to analyze what you see. And look at the angle that your camera is facing you. Look at what you see in the background behind you, and think about if it's what you want other people to see or not. Look for an opportunity to share a presentation on Zoom. I'll speak to my first recommendation, just make a slideshow of family photos. what a great opportunity to share a memory with some of the friends and family that we can't really get together with right now. Thank you very much, COVID-19. So create a short presentation of, oh, I don't know, your graduation, and get a couple of people that you went to school with to log on and view the presentation with you, just as a fun practice opportunity. And while you're doing that, why not pick a couple of those engagement techniques we talked about and try them out? So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We thought we'd come in at around an hour, and I believe we are almost 5 minutes ahead of that, which is fabulous because it gives us the opportunity to do a little extra Q&A. If you have questions now, I certainly welcome them. I'm going to be stopping my screen share so that I can take a closer look at our chat. But if you have questions later, please know that we're also available. I've popped my own email address and phone number for our office on the screen. So you're more than welcome to reach out to me at summer@llsc.on.ca or 519-681-7307.